Unsee the future.
Alright, should we do this then? Alright, let's do it.
Hello and welcome to Unsee the Future, the Hopeychattybits, the podcast in which I, Timo Peach, meet artists, solar punks and changemakers reimagining the stories we think we're in. This is a sort of Christmas special, and I realise as I push the cameras and mics up, I've not put a single bauble or bit of tinsel anywhere in the room. In fact, I think the shot looks a little bit more forlorn than normal. It's quite chilly. I wasn't going to show you this, but I am actually sitting here with a hot water bottle. There you go. And I think all my guests this morning are in similar states of snuggling in. How has the year treated you? Are you in poverty, energy poverty already? Are you sitting in a corner with a tin of beans like it's the end of the world? How we laugh about the serious state of everything. Well, over the next hour, we're going to try and cheer you up with talks of how we write stories to get ourselves out of this fine mess. And I have with us today three of my best buds. I'm not going to give them the biggest introduction because we could talk all day before they even come and join me. But they have encouraged and influenced me more than so many people. They are each turning point relationships for me. We've all played out with so many different things in so many different ways. I'm calling them the boys from Intertwingularity because it's the name of the podcast that we haven't yet got round to doing. Maybe on this show, we'll decide when we're going to do that because it would be good. But I will simply queue up my asset successfully and say, please give a huge welcome to Simon Brett, Andy Robinson, and Lee Rawlings. Boys, welcome to the show. How are you feeling this morning? I'm going to get rid of the overlay because I can't see my own face. Are you well? Where are you?
I think we're all in the extra area, aren't we?
Yes. I'm near a castle.
So yes, you happen to all live somewhere near each other geographically around the fine town of Exeter, which I have a big soft spot for. But we could be anywhere in space and time. Am I right, Lee?
Yes, of course we are. And in fact, 3 minutes ago, we were a million miles that way.
We were. So introduce yourselves quickly. What do we do? Starting with you, Simon. You're an illustrator, you're a broadcaster, you're a music maker, you are so many things. What gets you most excited creatively in the land of storytelling?
In the land of storytelling, emotion, connection, I think. And you know what? The space between disciplines, so the crossover, which is why we ended up talking about intertwingularity. It was the way that everything connects together. So for me, because I do illustration, because I do writing, I do a bit of everything, which means that I don't get much done because I'm wavering between them all the time. But that is the most exciting. Just like music styles, the most exciting music are those that cross genres.
Yeah, we all have a soft spot for atmospheric music, don't we? Lee, you make music as well as being an actor, comedian, host, I'm going to say event designer because it sounds particularly swank. You've made loads of different things happen, and I particularly love your Corner of the Eye shows. Which creative space gets you most excited, inspired?
It's quite hard. It's all of it, isn't it? Because I was talking to somebody yesterday about how I can't just see simple things. I seem to somehow look into everything, which is why I failed at maths, physics, all the rest of it. So I look beyond, always beyond. Why? And I think it's the same with stories and storytelling. It's all humanity. Obviously inanimate objects have their own story, which we are unplucking ourselves, which are also fascinating, i.e. science. But humanity has its story to tell, and every single human on this planet has its own story, and I take it from that, being a a comedy walkabout act. I build stories on tables and talk to people and find out a little bit about themselves, and in order to make it comedic in some sense and tap into who they are. But
I've heard you do this. I do hear you do this. Yes, you can be.
Yeah, you get a little slice of a story. But I mean, it's massive. I take it from all angles. Storytelling is everywhere.
Well, and trying to focus on stuff is. You're right. I think for all of us, in a way, we do find that hard. And it's not simply because life gets in the way and there's grown-up things to deal with, but also just the possibilities can make us go a bit... And I think that your shows, Lee, Corner of the Eye, dear viewer, listener, I do recommend you look up on Mixcloud, Corner of the Eye. Your mixes of... your selections for atmospherics, musical choices are some of my favourite shows ever. There is, of course, a Momo one from years ago as well, which was a very nice privilege to be on. But I particularly like is it the Jungles one? Which one is it with all the really jungly stuff on it? What does that mean?
Corner of the Exotica, isn't it? That one,
yes.
I think. Yeah, and there's lots of Les Baxter. It's all that kind of old King Kong, jungle tribal stuff going on. All the things that are probably utterly banned by now, but I love it. It's just beautiful. All of the music is fantastic.
I do, and Andy Robbins.
I love the one that you did with. It was Leica. Remember when Leica was in space, and you did that wonderful collection where you did that link where it was like Leica's owner was sending messages up to.
With my dodgy Russian accent. Yeah.
It was wonderful.
I agree. And there's another one you did, To the Moon, Behind the Moon, The Backside of the Moon. I can't remember what it was called now.
Yeah, and there's another one called Moon on a Stick, which was the original Corner of the Eye. But it's really fun. It's great creating, and like you say, a story. Simon, you do this anyway, and Andy, you do this, and Timo, you do this in everything you do. But just for a radio show, it's only a radio show, but you can play music, but it's kind of like, yeah, okay, that's music. But what about connecting the dots? And unfortunately, that's the kind of like the opposite of intertwingularity in a weird way. You don't want to pigeonhole stuff. That's exactly what Corner of the Eye kind of did, was pigeonhole a theme and tell a story within it.
But it was connecting the dots, and every selection that comes along with those is a great piece of musical storytelling just through music selection. But we've all done, you guys in particular, have all done a lot of broadcasting and podcasts. What shows have you done? And what podcasts are you still regularly appearing on, Simon?
Semi-regular on Strangers in Space podcast, which was originally the Blue Box podcast for Starburst magazine, but we kind of went out on our own, and that essentially, at its heart, is a Doctor Who podcast. But we've been doing it over 10 years, I think now, which means that you do get to the point where you want a bit of a break from Doctor Who.
Well,
we've done very well considering.
You have, and you've got to draw breath on Doctor Who, because next year it's going to be massive. It's the 60th, and that means, gentlemen, all of us were in some way involved with Andy, your incredible project, which is now going to be celebrating 10 years. Seasons of War. What was that?
Well, Seasons of War was both a wonderful anthology book, raising money for a very worthwhile children's charity. And that involved a number of authors, including Simon and Lee, contributed some beautiful stories.
You really did.
And I was sort of co-opted by Simon along the way to create, I think, what originally was going to be a kind of a little book trailer, basically to kind of promote the book itself. But it sort of took on a life of its own, really, because Muggins here just thought, "Oh, this is an opportunity to make my own episode of Doctor Who." So I got a little bit carried away, and
you did. You really did.
Pulled all you three lovely gentlemen in. I mean, all of you were crucial, central to making this happen. And it did end up a little bit like tail wagging the dog, in the sense that we crafted this lovely 5-6 minute piece of Doctor Who, which the fans seem to have really taken to heart. It's on YouTube, dear listener, if you want to go and explore it.
It is.
And we all know what Doctor Who fans are like when they love or they don't love something. So
They can sometimes sort of express an opinion. It's true.
Yes. I mean, they're one rung down from maybe Star Wars fans in sort of the level of shall we say
do it.
critical comments.
I don't know, but also in there is Star Trek fans, and they've certainly had some moments in the last few years, I would say.
That's true. Yeah. So actually, we did rather well. Actually, or rather, we got off scot-free. It's one or the other, really.
It's a beautiful end result.
I was going to say, just to quickly interject, I mean, if you look at all the comments underneath the film on YouTube, it's quite unusual. It is massively unusual for a fan-based project to have so much positivity. I think you only ever had one negative comment out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of positive comments saying this is the best Doctor Who fan thing I've seen. So, massive pat on the back to you, Andy. I mean, I don't want to be blowing smoke up this podcast.
Please do.
What are friends for if not that? Exactly that.
Storytelling-wise, it's excellent.
I was going to say the only negative discussion I ever saw was people arguing as to whether it should be classed as canon or not.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's it. And that, as you say, that one comment, which it was lovely because we saw it kind of got lost in the sleigh of positive comments, and everyone just sort of ignored it. It was great. It was really lovely thing.
It really was, and in that sense, all of us are used to telling stories, and by that I mean the real mechanics of it, coming up with an idea, then trying to work through how you first structure it, then how you get into the grain of rewrites and remakes to get something that really does effectively work. And in a way, well, class discussed, does science fiction teach us how to do this particularly well? We really get under the skin of ideas, world building, as well as emotional truth in science fiction. Am I right? Has sci-fi really helped us all to do better work?
Yeah, it has. But all sci-fi writers are very different again. So you'll have some very exploratory and lots of diction, lots of poetry coming out of someone like Ray Bradbury, and then you'll have something completely different, coming out of another author like Banks or whatever. But everybody writes very, very differently, but they're all trading on the same kind of fiction writing standards that have been set down over the ages. But it's the way you tell that story and the way you introduce that story. I'm a librarian, right? 27 years. I've tried to encourage people to read when they come through the door and they're like, oh, I don't read. So, right, pick that book up, read the first line. If it grabs you, keep reading. If paragraph, keep reading. Page, keep reading. And if you don't get past the first page, put it down, try another one, right? That's the best way, I think. I was just spat on that. The best way, I think, of...
Nice. It's the details that bring things alive as a professional broadcast.
I'm getting so excited. You can hear what I'm saying here. That's the best way of if you can capture somebody on the first line, the first paragraph, the first page, and then continue like that, no matter what you're doing, then it's absolutely you're getting it right.
And before you know it, you finish The Very Hungry Caterpillar.
I keep going back to it. It's
Stick your fingers through the holes, everything. It's just brilliant.
Stick your fingers through the holes. If that isn't I want to put that as the new topic lead on our Slack thread. Andy, how have you started with the first line of a script or a story?
A writer staring at a blank page. Oh my God! You've just given me cold sweats there.
I didn't mean to freeze you. No, but I mean, about punching in. You've got to grab people with the Star Destroyer coming over. Do the interesting bit. Don't go back and make 3 films about the boring bits you said you wouldn't do. Right. So how do you jump in under the Star Destroyer with pew pew when you're writing stories?
I mean, for all writers, I think all creators, really, it really does boil down to the idea. It's that core acorn, that seed that hopefully propagates and fires you up. So, for instance, going back to something like Seasons of War, we're left with an idea of, well, how do we describe this particular doctor, which is the War Doctor, which wasn't really explored within the TV series, and it was our mutual friend Declan May's idea to say, well, within that idea of the War Doctor, we've got lots of wriggle room because we haven't seen this person. So the nub of the idea was to create an idea around a doctor that we haven't seen, but come at it at a more oblique angle and say, well, what influence, what effect does the Doctor have on other people's lives? And I think we saw that a little bit at the end of The Power of the Doctor, when we've got that wonderful scene with all the companions all seated together. We'd never really seen that before. And then you suddenly realize this character, the Doctor, has huge influence over people's lives that he and she makes contact with. So that was the nub of the idea.
It was a good acorn, that, wasn't it? I think right at the end of that whole, right at the end of Jodie's kind of tenure as the Doctor, suddenly there's a cracking single idea. I tend to call this the napkin. Show me the napkin. Something you could draw really simply, a shape or a single line on whatever you've got to hand in a restaurant. Simon, if you had some great napkins, what things have... I don't know whether that sounds like a well-phrased question. I don't know. But, tell me, have you had any great napkins, Simon?
I think for me, if I've done a fair few short stories, and it's always about that idea, and whether that's a sci-fi idea. Usually it's a thought experiment at the heart of it. And usually, I wrote a story where it was a particular character who was in a time loop. Another time loop. Oh, another time loop. No. And
he's here all week, folks.
Simon, you are in a time loop at the moment, aren't you?
Idea of a character. I think this is a story that's never actually been published, because I think it's one of the ones I put in for a Big Finish competition or something, of this character who was revisiting a house, so that ended up being multiple versions of the same person at different stages of their life, because the new one would always... He's writing this down. He's enthusiastically writing this down.
Yeah, what is it? What's that very boring old quote that good people come up with ideas and geniuses steal? Well, there is Rawlings
frozen in time, according to the screen. But
he has literally frozen in time. If you're listening to this, there's no impact at all.
I must have created a paradox of some kind.
It's a good freeze frame if you are watching the video.
But you can work like hell at a sci-fi idea of something being very clever. Let's look at Stephen Moffat's Heaven Sent, in which the Doctor is going through a process, and then every time he dies, he appears in a transporter again. So you get another Doctor trying to solve the same problem.
Yes.
But that idea, as clever as it is, and they're the ones that they do excite me, but you've got to go full circle, and you've got to come back to what that means emotionally, and that human element of what it's all about. It ends up that whole story is about grief. And what I find is that I'll get an idea which is fairly intricate, and I spend ages and ages sweating over making sure this idea makes sense in its own world. As such, it doesn't necessarily have to make sense in the real world, but as long as it makes sense in that world that I'm creating, then as long as that works, and then I go full circle. So it's that thing of you've almost got to go away from reality to come back to it.
Yeah,
and it's that truth which is what makes the connection with the reader.
Emotional truth's a phrase I keep coming back to, and I think it's extremely relevant for storytelling in our times. And when it comes to sci-fi, the classic thing over decades and decades sci-fi tends to fall into is exposition, getting tripped up on the idea at the expense of emotional nuance. But the best stories have both a single idea. They go, oh, I get what you're doing here, but then to explore the human implications of it. I've always said that the episodes of Star Trek I most enjoy are the ones that they've got no budget for, where they're just hanging about on the ship and unblocking the loos. To me, that idea of warp time, where you're treading out the miles, is much more interesting than the wham bam stuff.
Those early Star Trek films are all about family,
Yes, exactly.
I was going to say that, I mean, obviously sci-fi is the core thing that links all of us together. But in terms of why sci-fi rather than any other sort of creative or literary genre, I think it really is because of that wriggle room. I mean, often science fiction has been kind of looked down at from, regular literature as being not worthy. But actually, I think in a way, it has a wriggle room that conventional literature, maybe conventional filmmaking doesn't have, because it can deal with purely ideas. It can say "what if" in a way that other forms can't, and within that space, you can explore anything. I mean, it's Timo, it's what you've been doing with your most recent project, which might
Yes.
just a little bit of a segue there.
Got to imagine that's going to pay off later, dear viewer listener. Hold that thought. Yes, exactly right. I know just what you're saying about that, and it's why I'm finding science fiction an interesting theme for our times, because with all my research looking at planet stuff, climate communicating, social impact storytelling, the big take home for me from just wanting to make something about a little musical about sci-fi is we're not looking forward anymore. What do you guys think about that sort of macro challenge of
this current almost obsession with retrospective nostalgia, which I think we've all enjoyed, but I think it's time now. I think it's time to start moving forward with it all. And I think the we've got our Star Wars, we've got our Marvel, we've got all these TV shows and everything being made, stuff that we could never have dreamt of as a child, being created now. And the initial, if you think about the last 3 Star Wars films, and people were surprised how nostalgic they were. It was no surprise at all to me that that's what they would. But it has enabled, and then we now look at Andor, the latest TV series that's been done, and this is Star Wars moving forward and growing up, and approaching things, proper storytelling, proper depth, and looking for intelligence from the viewer. So Star Wars is moving on. I think the rest of us need to as well. But it is incredibly, with the times we live in, it's incredibly difficult to look forward. It has to be said.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think Star Wars is finding itself in the TV format. And for years, I wrote it off as this beautiful vision that had nothing to say. And suddenly I'm realizing that incredibly world-built universe of Star Wars is a fantastic setting for really doing sci-fi now. That this idea of a sort of broken economic universe with fascist overtones always lurking, and this sense of sort of spiritual connection to the cosmos, which I used to think was just cod. Now I'm thinking, oh yeah, this is possibly the best sandbox to look at where we're at right now. Amazing. Lee, what do you think?
Well, I burnt my mushrooms this morning. No, hear me out. So, okay, I love mushrooms, right? And they taste absolutely fantastic when they're cooked just right. Oh. Now, I made the mistake of popping the mushrooms in my frying pan and going to do my hair, what little I have. And then when I came down, I'd burnt my mushrooms. Right. So the metaphor is pretty obvious, I feel, that I attended to my vanity upstairs, and I burnt the thing that I could have made in the future really tasty and nice. Instead, I left it on the hot pan of ignorance and hot-headedness of the people that seem to be in charge of the mushrooms, our future.
Turns out it's you poor sap.
And it was me all along. So but I had the power to change the future of that tasty mushroom, right? So this is the point. If we leave ourselves in the hands of other people doing things for us and being apathetic, then our future's going to burn. It's not going to work. It never has worked. We believe in it to people who don't know what they're doing, and they're just all about themselves. Their vanity, themselves, just leaving it. Yeah, it'd be fine. We'll let other people sort it out, and forget it. Let's just get the media involved. They'll sort it out. So it's us. We're the important people. We're the people that care about where we're going and what the future is, and we need to start a revolution.
I agree, but
I suggest we all wear mushroom hats, though.
Mushrooms are very symbolic for now. Look, last night I went to see an amazing bit of live theatre. It was called Illegal Dance, and it was a brand new sort of multimedia. I don't like the phrase multimedia, but live production by Tony Adigan. He was the choreographer. It kind of blew us away. It was just in Pavilion Dance in Bournemouth, where I've seen so many great little productions, and they very simply used projection and sound. We listened to sound on headphones and actually had 2 scores to keep jumping between to contrast different ways of hearing. Yeah, it could have been distracting, and it actually made you look at it differently. I mean, just incredible physical movements, just a 7-piece troupe. And it is this idea, a bit like Footloose, that dance is now illegal. But the tone it set immediately was, oh, dear Lord, it feels like this is the truth being peeled back in our times, the underbelly of economics, not just for the last 40 years of sort of post-Reagan and Thatcher economics, but actually the last 200 industrialized years of the economics, the last 400 years of merchant capitalism, the last 10,000 years of hierarchical valuation where we're all in boxes and bits of meat. It feels like it's all coming out at the moment. And the line they had in headphones right near the end was, imagine if all self-expression was illegal. Imagine if the artists were seen as criminals. Actually, art is how we fight back. And I did this little fist pull when they said that. It's over. We want to start a revolution, Lee, but how are we, Andy, how do we start a revolution with storytelling? Is that how do we show? Where do we? Oh, I need to sit down. It's a lot, isn't it?
I just want to fry some mushrooms right now. That's
me too. It is Sunday morning.
The storytelling is being told by the wrong people at the moment. We've got the media.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's it. So it's, we need to start a paper for a start, get a national paper up together of truth and real stuff and nice things. And, Timmy the Turtle walks again is quite nice, at the end of something on telly. But what you want is lots of those hopey chatty things, all of those things that are positive. It's an injection of negativity that we get every single day. Even when I pull up at the garage, I get really cross looking in those plastic things and seeing all this tabloid rubbish. It is rubbish. Come and get me. And then you're sitting there going, and it just brings you down. And if that brings me down just by looking at it like 20 feet away, what about the people that are reading it and being influenced all the time by this junk that's coming out? Exactly.
Pump it into your brains.
It does really come back to narratives. This is the sort of working thesis that I know Team and myself have really subscribed to. Well, I think we all do on this podcast, which is basically that everything, everyone, everything that has consciousness, every human being, every element of our lives boils down in essence to a story, a narrative.
Yeah.
What is the narrative of this person? What's their story? Or what are they trying to convey? What story are they trying to push onto you? So you pass the news agents and you see the tabloid headlines. They're owned by particular people who have particular views that they want to push across, and they're using that as a narrative device.
Do you think the billionaires who own almost all our press might have an agenda or some things they want to say?
It's possible. It's possible. And then if everything really does boil down to a narrative, and how we behave and how we're influenced and how our lives are shaped, how we shape our lives, does come down to effectively a story, Whether it's, as you say, Timo, the story that we think we're in, or whether it's a story that we're presented and we swallow. It's all about stories. So in order to affect change, we've got to tell a better story than the other person. We've got to tell a more compelling story. Because we are story-driven creatures. We buy in to the story that we feel is most palatable. We do it every 4 or so years when we vote at a general election. But we do it on a daily basis. We buy a product because we convince ourselves, we create a narrative in our own head that this thing that we're about to buy online is something that we really need, that is going to transform our lives. And we're helped along by the narrative of a commercial or an advert.
And don't you think they're boring now as well? Maybe it's just my age, but it feels like everything is more of the retreads are more and more shallow every time the adverts come out. And I can't believe any young people buying into those stories. Is it me, or is everything just tired, or is it just me?
Yeah, me as well. Yeah.
We're tired.
But isn't everybody? It feels to me like the spirit of the age is everyone's tired, and half don't want to admit it.
Slightly zombified, aren't we? But
I think so. Well, look, we have all worked together on lots of different projects over the years. One of them that you've given great support to me about is the thing that got me into this whole looking at the world, waking up, maybe I should have thought about the planet I live on. And my way into that was, dear viewer, listener, I've said this many times, you probably remember, was a music project simply meant to be the third album by Momo Tempo. It is, of course, called The Shape of Things to Hum. I have, of course, still in no way finished it, but it's like this thing I talk about now forever. Oh yeah, things. Yeah, that's right. When I'm 80, I'll still have head of horn department Pat Hayes going, "Oh, it is going to happen, mate." So look, but in this sort of vaguely not at all Christmassy looking special, I wanted you guys on because I have done something over the summer with a little bit of time off that I can't really afford to tune into the cosmos. What should I do? And I drafted something and I've sent it to you, and it's a good excuse to share with all of us the beginning of the new brand and some stories about what I want to do with this thing. So are you buckled in? Do you want to see the first ever sting for The Shape of Things to Hum?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Come on.
Strap in.
Bring it up.
Oh, that's nice.
Sci-fi.
Am I just cold, or was that?
I got chills.
Was that a future ghost? Ooh.
Now, I'm always having a go at terrible logos at the beginning of films that overstate their case when they're just a logo. I might have slightly overstated the case musically, therefore, what is just a logo. But when that came together, I sort of got quite excited at the end of the summer. It looks real. It looks like a West End show. And we have worked on, especially you and I, Andy, we worked on a test project, 5 songs to help us unsee the future, an alarming number of years ago now, where we tested this principle of your film and my musical show kind of working together. But I've taken it to another step. I've only gone and written an entire script for a cabaret musical with characters. And as a tee-up, I sent it to you guys, and the tee-up is this. I've got an old mate who was the first person I formed a band with, Steve Payne. And I've quoted this many times. He said, "Hey, Timo, you know that time when you've just written a new idea for a song? You've had a napkin for a song. Oh, yeah. And you're really excited about it. Yeah. And it's the best thing you've ever written. Yeah. He said, under no circumstances whatsoever, send it to anyone at this point." And so I hit send to you 3 jokers immediately, and I don't know what you make of it. So this is a safe space. I've written a musical. First impressions of the bits you've glimpsed at? What did you think?
Who's going to speak first?
tumbleweed.
It's a great start.
I mean,
feel great already.
He's gone. He's left.
Hang on. Can you hear me?
Was it something I said?
No, my battery's just started on my camera, so
you're either evolved or regressed into an avatar.
No, that was a perfect punchline out of my.
So while he's away, visually, what did you think of it?
No one's listening, are they?
Ambitious.
Oh, he's back now.
Ambitious is the word. I kept thinking, blimey, this is ambitious. Whoa,
Epic.
that's ambitious.
Brechtian.
Good lord, that sounds.
Yeah, it is though, isn't it? It's epic. It's telling you it's didactic.
It really is.
It is, yeah. But it's got all of these wonderfully massive themes. It feels like a big Greek tragedy with. Do you know what? I'm not even going to begin to shout out influences. It's got everything in it. But and you know, there's even
big Dickens in there.
Bit of Dickens in there, yeah. A bit of Dickens too. I love Dickens. It's massive, and it's not one musical. It's a Harry Potter Part 1, Part 2. It's so big. It just feels massive, and I got lost in the first. Are you ready for this? I got lost in the first few pages. You remember talking about pages?
Yeah.
I wasn't grabbed, only because I knew exactly where you were going with it and I could see it, but there was a massive, not an info dump, but a dialogue dump. Very, very, there's lots of things to take in very, very quickly. Yeah. So I don't know whether you're doing like an introduction of in the year 2099, so it kind of sets the audience up a little bit and really gives you an idea of what's happening before they sit down, or you want to just Brechtian them and just go, listen, you're intelligent, work it out.
No, you're so.
I want my money back.
Yeah, you know what we said earlier about the easiest trap for sci-fi writers to fall into is didactic exposition. Yeah, so I did loads of that in the opening scene. But I don't know how you guys find first drafts. I wanted to get from A to Z and have a version where I knew I'd done that. So I'd set it up and it was all in there. And now I need to go and pare back, probably most especially that opening scene. But at least I felt like I've covered it. It's all in there. There's a kind of bloated first version. How do you get...
There is a rule amongst writing that first draft is for you.
Yeah.
And for you alone. So you've broken that rule straight away.
I have no self-control after 30 years of making stuff. I'm excited to get this.
Don't burn out your dopamine, please. Don't do it.
No.
That's why I keep things to myself. But,
yeah, maybe too much. Maybe you keep things to yourself too much there, Simon.
Well, yeah, more than likely.
I think Timo, I think your mate was wrong. The received wisdom is, you never show anyone your first draft. You know, you get it to a certain point and, you know, it's presentable and polished and you've worked out all your themes and your strands and your threads. And then you start sending it to, you know, sort of trusted people. I think it's really, really difficult when you've rewritten and polished too much to change stuff later on. Yeah. Because you've put the work in and you won't want to change it. You won't because no, this is how it needs to be. I polished that bit until it starts to shine. Right. And now he's telling me that it doesn't work. You need to be careful who you send the first draft to. They need to be people who are trusted, people whose opinions you value, who are going to give you feedback. I have no idea why you've sent it to us, but
no, we were on a thread, we were talking, I got carried away. I still have no perspective like an adult maker, but never mind.
Listen, can we just get this in perspective for people watching or listening who haven't seen the draft? It's 88 pages, isn't it? Something like that?
Yeah, it's two acts. That adds up to about an hour and a half, I think, probably totally together.
Yeah, but with scene changes, because we're not talking simple scene changes, we're talking Star Wars scene changes. They are, I mean, I can't even envision how this is going to work without lots of money and it being Western. It is a Western.
We're talking genre hopping scene changes, aren't we?
Yeah, we're talking, you know, Simon said ambitious. it's not only ambitious. If this came to the stage, it would be the best thing on the stage. But it
But
needs,
how will it ever come to the stage?
how will it come to the stage? So I mean,
Well-
there are ways, because when you did the first thing that we went to, which was like a kind of an introduction to this, and we all went in blindfolded. It was really, really cool. All these sorts of things, and we just heard, and then we pulled the blindfolds down, and then there you were, like this fantastic winged goddess in a white suit, dancing around, prancing about, singing songs. It was amazing, right? It was really mind blowing. And you had a message to tell, and that was quite concise. This has got not just a message, but a lot of messages all in. This is basically all of Unsee the Future, isn't it? It's everything you've ever thought about in one big cabaret play. So it's going to be amazing, but obviously you're going to need to rewrite it, which I'd like to put the question to you. How are you going to feel going back to those 88 pages and putting even more, or stripping it down perhaps, or making it move in a different way, or repacing it, or whatever?
Well, that's the chat. How do we all find rewrites? Because obviously we know that most films that arrive are miracles, even bad ones. How they got funded, how they got everybody involved, how everyone got in some way paid, and then films that are genuinely emotionally connecting and immersive. How did any story get past the process of all those different people, most of whom are producers? How did great films get past bloody producers who were just thinking about corporate bottom line and markets to make something that changes our lives?
We're back to that Andy's point about who you send your first draft to. You just don't send them to producers. You edit for them, so they only hear the good bits.
But from a creative point of view, you need, I think you do need early feedback. So it was very brave, but also bold of you to send it out at this stage. But I think this is where you get the most feedback. I don't know how much we are supposed to say about the plot of the story at this stage. Should we be just keeping it somewhat under wraps? Or
no, you can a bit. I mean, I think the structure we're fine to talk about, and it is very much. I mean, if I quickly fill in, it is The Shape of Things to Hum. The inception of it was simply music album by Momo Tempo. Loads of us love science fiction. Why don't I use my goofy, playful alternative electro pop to explore the many worlds of sci-fi? How do I structure it? Every song's a different theme of science fiction. Boom. And then as I did it, I just found myself getting more. Those different what ifs started speaking to me collectively, and I realized it was going to be sort of saying something else. So I went mad and made a book. I turned it into a sort of brand Bible because I felt it was going to be more than just the album at the heart of it. Here's some of the stills if you're watching the video, The Shape of Things to Hum. And it felt to me like it was going to be a stage experience as well as an album. And the structure of the album, as I've now got it down, is my voice, like the ghost of Future Shock, this central narrative character leading you around the underworld of different futures. He's on the album, and there's loads of tracks, but the full musical version, he takes our central sort of character, Jack, on a tour of the underworld. And I've deliberately set it up to be a bit didactic, or to get away with that by making it a Greek tragedy, or Dante's Inferno for sort of cabaret, where the ghost of Future Shock is like the ghost of Christmas past or future. He's also Virgil leading Dante through the underworld. And then we meet these other guides who are like new sentinels for a new future, and Jack and the ghost go looking for them. So it really is set up like a sort of Greek tragedy. You're right.
Wizard of Oz.
It is Wizard of Oz, another reference. Yes,
definitely.
So
it's great. It's great. It's what it is. It's mind blowing. Is what it is. Andy, I just need to quickly say it took me nearly half a day to read it. That's around about 4 hours, right?
Oh God, mate, I'm sorry.
No, you know me.
Me.
You know me. I look beyond. Anyway, so I'm reading like 2 or 3 pages, and I sent it to Simon and said, "Oh," and then came back and that was the first quick few pages. But then after that, I had to spend time per scene, really ingesting and thinking about it, and also trying to visualize it, because you know what I'm like. I'll try and visualize things on the stage and see how it would work. But it was, I want this to be. I genuinely want to see this. It's got to happen. So if anybody is watching this, has got piles of money and wants to take on the best project they'd ever been involved with,
Cameron McIntosh.
you need to talk to Timo, because it's incredible. But the ambition is huge.
Well, thank you. I do have a kind of, I will sort of say at the end a bit about how I'm structuring this up to try and get to this full musical stage. But also the structure of it physically is pretty simple. And Andy, we have tested this, haven't we? Lee, you mentioned this, 5 songs to help us unsee the future. Andy, I commissioned you to write a filmic element to this. And I gave you just a handful of themes that I wanted to explore and a sort of broad starting point. And then you went away and wrote a short film for The Shape of Things to Hum, for the live experience, that put the heart and soul into the live experience with an extraordinary moment we won't give away. But every time I explained that moment, just explained it to people over the desk with my book, everybody went, wow. So, and then we tested it, at least the structure of pulling focus between goofy live music and filmic backdrop at 5 songs. How did that go, that experience?
I mean, well, we were all there for the actual live experience itself, a sort of a cut down, but in some ways a very pure version of The Shape of Things to Hum. And this is one of the things that I love about the idea, that it can be scaled at so many different levels, and I know you'll talk about that in a bit. But 5 songs was just really taking a selection of the songs from the album, presenting it in a much more sort of a musical presentation, interspersed with some film sequences that I did for this character, the Martian artist. It's bizarre, actually, because tonally, the shifts between my film and what goes on stage are huge.
Yes.
And I thinking about this recently, I think, I suddenly feel like the middle-aged grown-up, in a group of people that are just goofing around and having a great time.
How dare you?
And I'm saying, now for the serious bit, just
that isn't
quieten down while we have my sci-fi naturalistic drama, because it really is very much Oz. I mean, I've got the way that we've shot this kind of prologue version is like very naturalistic, very kind of straight on, and then suddenly there's electro disco music and
I can see why you might think on paper that won't work, but in the room it did work, didn't it?
It did seem to work, yeah. I mean, and I think this is the value of testing.
Yeah.
What we did is we took the nub of the idea and were able to present it to an audience most of whom had very little, if anything, to do with the project. So they were coming in completely fresh.
Yeah.
And to get their idea. And actually the real connective tissue between the filmed inserts and the stage musical elements wasn't really there, because we hadn't been able to kind of film a true proper finale that brings all these elements together as we would in the final piece. And so considering, it worked.
The part in the script where we do read that culmination of that story of the Martian artist was a punch the air moment for me. It was like, oh, this is where it is. This is where so it's going to be a case of getting those 2 roads and finding how they actually meet. I think that's going to be your sweet spot.
And I feel it is, because I know when I've described that scene to people without the music, but you have all heard the piece of music Contact, that when Andy wrote the script, I immediately swiveled from I've read his script to computer, made this piece of music, sent it straight back to him. And this is what it made me think of. And that piece, I wrote it right near the beginning. Contact really works with what Andy's beautifully written. And now, knowing it so well, when I read it in this context of the whole narrative, it got to me. Bits of reading back my own story with your story in it, Andy, really got to me recently. So, how did you feel about it reading The Martian Artist in amongst where I've placed it in the rest of the kind of strange cabaret?
I think structurally it works. Again, as Simon was saying, initially you are getting these big tonal shifts from what's happening on the stage to what's happening on a projected screen, and because the characters on the stage are not really referring to what happens on the screen, particularly in the early parts of the stage show. They do feel very separate. Actually, obviously, thematically, they're very much intertwined, because the Martian Artist basically creates creates an artistic gesture that galvanizes and unites people, basically.
Yes, and it's incredible.
And that's very much kind of a parallel journey for Jack, making sense. Martian Artist is using art to make sense of her own personal space and the world around her, and Jack is being led on this journey to make sense of some inner stuff that she's working through, but also trying to work out the wider world as well. So they're going along parallel tracks, but you don't really know how they're knitting together until very much at the end. And at the end, you've got characters actually directly referencing what we've seen in The Martian Artist.
Yeah,
for me, very quickly, this won't mean much to the listener. Where I really felt that it stepped up a gear in terms of the musical, and actually was really firing some ideas for me about what was going to work, was around about scene 10, when we get the idea that Jack is actually in a part of an unfinished book that she was writing, an unfinished novel.
Very meta.
And then there were elements that were coming in, and that really kind of fired up something for me that maybe in a story conference at another time we can talk about in a bit more detail, because I think some of those elements could be brought closer to the start and actually would make more sense in terms of the various locales that she's going to.
Yeah. I mean, there's something you do in the later stages of writing is that you start regressively seeding.
Yes.
You look at what happens at the end and you start seeding backwards.
That second draft stuff.
Absolutely. But make no bones about it. This whole thing is about the validity of art.
Yeah.
And it's fighting for the validity of art. And that's kind of at the heart of the Martian Artist story in some respects. But it's and I suppose if you've got any mission, it's to bridge that gap between what people think is just going on in their minds, their thoughts, what they're watching on television. Yeah. That's one thing, but it has nothing to do with reality. Yeah. But actually the two are completely intermingled.
Yes.
Because unfortunately what seems to happen, this is an idea that's just kind of popped in my head, and I'm sorry if I'm talking absolute B word, but is the problem that the people who are getting places and making things happen are the ones with no imagination, because they see no issue with doing what's in their head and what's out there in the real world, because they think, oh, that's all that matters. The one thing that really winds me up is people who say, I don't like science fiction, it's a load of rubbish. Because you think, right, you have no imagination and that you do not have the creativity or the oomph to think that something that appears in your head could actually be real.
But I think they're scared of it. I think they're scared of opening up. It's like being, when I do my comedy waiter, one of the first things I learnt, clown, is to find your inner child and just be silly again. So, I was acting like a baby on a stage and all that. It's really embarrassing stuff, but you break that down, you bring it out. So then I can be foolish and I can look foolish, and I can be, people sincerely think that I'm foolish and childish, and they buy into the story. They buy it really, really quickly. And I think, you need to allow yourself that. I think every human on the planet is creative. We all tell stories. Everybody tells a story on their mobile phone every 3 seconds. We're all storytellers. It's just knowing where the story needs to go. Like Timo's trying to say, it's like guiding people and saying, okay, this is a good example in COVID, isn't it? Where they said, "Oh, artists, we could just have to train to do another job," and then everybody went, "Wait a minute, what about all that free TV, free art? Who do you think made all this stuff?"
Yeah.
There's a whole load of technicians involved and woodwork people making the scenes or what have you, but creatively, there are actors on the stage entertaining you for a year for free or whatever. There are graphic designers doing this. There are painters doing that. These are artists. These are the people you are saying, they don't mean anything. And that's because there's a gap between, like Simon said, there is this strange gap between people who generally look at art and think it's all Ponzi, and people who just want to accept the fact that, the government's doing everything or somebody boring is doing it, so we'll just go toe the line. But we will make use and look at things that are creative, because, let's just say that the top selling films of all time are all science fiction based, right?
Yeah.
Apart from possibly Titanic by a science fiction lover. But, it's, if you think about it, they are all sci-fi. Everything is a science fiction. It's a what if. It's Marvel is sci-fi, fantasy is sci-fi. It's science fiction, fantasy, all the same kind of thing, really.
Well, and that's, I guess, the point that led me to, in a way, that science fiction is having its time now, in that we're now not just using it to think of, progress, we could have jet age, we could have robot manservants, but actually we're in a crisis of imagination, and I'm hearing that phrase used a lot more. So that's why I'm a lot more interested in solar punk than in cyberpunk, because cyberpunk looks cool and we're all addicted to things that look really nice when you shine to a pink and a blue light across the front and the back, but that's not enough. We need visions of tomorrow that aren't just mechanized, that are more connected to where we're going. Last night, sitting in front of this incredibly cool piece, firstly, I went through a range of emotions. At firstly, I just thought, God, this is really cool. I can't do this. My project sounds really stupid. I'm dicking about with like a cabaret. God, while the world's burning. But then as I moved through that, they
that's the tagline.
Yeah, 5 stages of grief.
Dicking about with cabaret. Yeah.
While the world's burning.
These are all 5 stages of grief, Andy. But even they reference a really interesting biblical quote right near the end. One of the performers quoted, it's one of the books of Samuel, where King David dances before the Lord in his pants, and he's so full of kind of joy, his connection to his vision of God, that as the ruler, he doesn't care about his dignity. And he actually says, when told off by all the vicars around him, "You can't do that, you're the king." He says, "I will be even more undignified than this." And I thought it was really interesting. They pulled out that very quote and he kept repeating it while dancing around. This is defiance. Art is defiance. Exuberant self-expression is defiance to a system that wants to lock down the opposite. And so foolishness, in a way, Lee, you're talking about a real key principle of art, which is embodiment. When we get into our drama school space and get past all, I feel silly and awkward, and then start rolling around and making basic emotional noises, we're actually getting more in contact with the fuller truth of who we are. And that's what art's got to help us do when we deal with crisis, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why art needs to be so important in making decisions about the future as well, bringing the artistic brains in. I mean, if you look at the way that Apple's worked, okay, you may or may not like Apple, but initially you heard all the stories about them going to work and having a slide to slide down into their chair and all this sort of thing. It's all a bit like, oh, that's a bit wanky, isn't it? But actually,
I want to slide.
But it sounds like it was a really interesting place to have a creative people with technical skills to create new things. I think that's Apple anyway. But that's a good way of combining the two skill sets or thought processes.
But the challenge, I was going to say, the challenge we've got there is that embodiment works in any direction. So loosening yourself up to find your emotional truth, being able to express yourself, that's something that, why isn't everybody taught dance and drama until they're 18? The basics of running your emotional inner life and your physical self-confidence. But I think the problem with all sort of everybody goes mad when they become billionaires because you get more and more detached with physical practice from the value of things. So you end up believing your own hype and having your own sort of nostalgia of, oh yeah, I'm constantly told I know what I'm doing. And the humanity gets harder, I think, to hang on to, your sense of connection to the world and to each other once you're all the way up there. So Apple have become a corporate monster. And it seems like a nice, here's some playful user interfaces that are a lot nicer than engineers doing it without any art. But in the end, it comes back to, but what we really embody is the profit margin, and everything's pushed there.
Yeah, and then it's all pushed away, and it becomes boring and not creative and not fulfilling, and also not moving forward with anything. It stays the same and it stays stagnant. So exactly. Creativity and artistic integrity and design and technical aspects are it's integral to making things work in the future and being interesting.
Well, look, the last point I want to bring up before we kind of wrap things up, that people will say, well, we won't need artists anymore because of AI. And the internet is awash with people dicking about with Midjourney and other things at the moment, and computers famously not knowing how to do hands, which, Simon, you must have a lot of sympathy for that as an illustrator.
Yeah, it's reassuring, if nothing else, to illustrators. I think artists have got up their game. That's the thing. I think designers are in real trouble, if I'm honest. I've seen some of the AI-driven design work, and I think, wow, lower-end designers no longer have any work.
Well, that's interesting. I was going to jump in and say, Lee, you found some examples on Midjourney of science fiction stuff that are actually really good, and I was scrutinizing, thinking it might be Midjourney, but this looks like an actual film. Some of this stuff. Look at that!
Wow,
the nuance of some of these things. Look at that for a vision of a. What was this, Lee? I've forgotten what this particular theme was.
This was Tron by Jodorowsky, I think.
Wow, what an idea! And then look at that for a perfect 70s aesthetic. That looks like a movie that never was. That this is how I'd love The Shape of Things to Hum to kind of look. Look at this piece. How incredible. Sort of communist space is incredible. So I think some of this stuff it's going to play a role.
That was from the film that was never made, of course, called Pong.
Pong.
I love the poster you also posted with that. So there's some interesting possibilities. We've got to keep our heads as artists, haven't we?
I think at the end of the day, though, just briefly talking about AI and worrying that we're all going to be out of a living. Not that I've ever made a living.
Well, I was going to say, so bring on the news.
So you've got Jodorowsky's version of Tron there, but at the end of the day, somebody of flesh and blood had to come up with Tron, and somebody had to be Jodorowsky with all his art influences, then that was fed into a computer. If a computer had to start with a completely blank sheet with no creative inputs, what would it come up with? Would it come up with anything? It needed actual human input before it could then blend all these elements. So I don't think we're out of a job just yet.
No, it's still referencing, as you say. The point is the inputs are references we've made, and what we need is not just more self-referential stuff that's done more automatedly. That's more robot crap. That's sort of central to my point, that one way is this soulless robot crap. Soul is a good word here, because that really means emotional truth, and emotional truth isn't just testimony, it's connection to what we really value. Planet. That's why things should be looking more like sort of this idea of solar punk fusing something ancient in our truth and something forward looking. That's an interesting nexus we find ourselves in. But we've got to actually have vision for the societies we want. We've got to make decisions, and we've got to write stories about what we really want, haven't we?
Yeah, and you've got to normalize that. So that picture that you just showed there with the cows walking around and the greenery of of this wonderfully kind of almost brutalesque, but anyway, I'm going off. That's really lovely, and that's beautiful to look at. But the more we normalize that in maybe films and storytelling as well, the better, as opposed to making it a particular thing like Tomorrow World or something that was out recently, where it's like,
Yes.
this is what it could be like, isn't it wonderful? It's like, well, yeah, okay, well, let's make a film about the fact that it's already like that, and then just stick stories in it which are more interested than the surroundings. So just keep normalizing this great future that we could possibly have.
Normalizing it. I
Very
love that,
quickly,
Lee.
the tricky thing though to get engaging stories is that resistance. There's got to be resistance to the story to make it. If somebody want to turn the next page, how do you introduce resistance to something which is an ideal? That's
And it's exactly, it's the problem with solar punk in a way. And when I was talking with Serena Ulibarri about this on an earlier episode of UTF, she's the editor-in-chief of one of the big solar punk publishers. I said, how do you get around that? She said, well, it really is to do with work in progress. There's plenty of drama, and drama's the same axis as comedy, actually, subversion of ideals. The things you aim for and then the things your character really wants. What are they projecting? What are they really doing? It's a really useful just internal grit that any character can have. But actually also solar punk's about transition. So you are setting people in a world that isn't perfect, but putting characters there who are genuinely trying different ways of doing things and showing that it can be done. And I had that exact problem with setting up the narrative for Things to Hum, because what it wanted to do as a tour around the galaxy of old sci-fi stories, how science fiction's been teaching us the future, was give us all these, all the same old stories again, which would just end up all the same backward looking. So that's why I set it in 2099 with a bit of half and half was the compromise for this, where Jack is actually growing up in a world that post-crisis has had to get more solar punk, but she's still feeling a yearning for something much better and much bigger, and a sense of failure that they're not there yet. So I had to compromise a bit of the old stuff. You highlight a key storytelling problem there, Simon, for us trying to show better worlds.
But you're part of the way there with the Martian artist section.
Yeah.
Because there is resistance there, and the person reaches past that resistance.
Yes.
Breaks the rules.
And that's why you're not the sensible one here, Andy. I feel like we need the sort of cinematic, deep, serious bit to contrast deliberately with what Lee and I have much more kind of cultural association with, which is mucking about in a cabaret comedy way. And if we can put, to me, comedy is a vital part of overcoming fear. So if we can somehow put together the gravity of it with the freedom of, I will be even more undignified than this, then we're going to actually own futures that don't exist yet. I think that's my point.
Yeah.
I know we're just about to go. Just on one last point, it has got a lot of comedy in it. It is really upbeat. It's very funny as well, which is very very Timo. If anybody knows who Timo is, this is you. This entire play. But I also feel like it could be a great book. There's enough in there for it to be a good science fiction cabaret book. I know that sounds a bit odd, but you could do it, and I think that's a thought for the future. If for any reason this doesn't take off and Macintosh doesn't throw you lots of money and it's in the West End next year, then perhaps a novel would be an interesting direction for it.
Thank you. I did write this script not strictly like a shooting script. It's actually written with a few descriptors, so you could just read it. But I have set it up to be quite doable in the physical sense. It's just going to be in front of a flat screen with a few simple projections, and the transitions would be just part of a video projection on the back. And I think that real simple sense of it's a cabaret. It could be quite a small stage, but then you get drawn into something epic by Andy's film, made very filmically when we find the budget. And that pulling focus of being, you're in the room, we're actually turning to camera and making jokes with the audience, like proper basic theatre. And then we're taking you to Mars, and then we're taking you to all these other worlds as we drop the songs in, going, and here's the one about when robots took over the world. Here's the one about when megalomaniacs go mad. And I was pleased, I think, by how your film, Andy, and all these themes came together into what felt like a big moment at the end. And knowing, I don't think you know you won't do the last couple of songs and things that show up at the end. I do, and I'm a silly booby, but it all really got to me. But then I work alone in a shed. I have no reference to shareholders or success. So what do I know? Guys, look, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate this. I know it's a self-indulgent one. You've encouraged me more than so many. I've had a lot of encouraging, clever creatives in my life. You three have done an awful lot to make me feel like what I'm doing is real. I feel the same way about all your work and how we get to swap stuff. Does anybody lastly want to say anything about the possibility of Intertwingularity and us doing this as a podcast for us?
Well, this has worked really nicely. You brought up a few things about storytelling. You brought up things to hum. I mean, if we can go along the lines of, throwing in a theme, say transport or communication, and then just go off on one, then and people like it, then perhaps it would work.
Plus, we've got an excellent theme tune, which you commissioned me to do, and then I immediately nicked for the shape of things to hum, and it is the theme from Intertwingularity. So thanks, everyone.
Our work here is done.
Bless you, Simon, Lee, and Andy. I could talk to you every time we get on a call. I do say I could talk to you all day, but we have to probably go and do other things. Bless you guys. Lots of love. Cheers for joining me.
Bye.
Unsee the future. Utterly marvelous. So that, an indulgent one, but you might find that intriguing, dear viewer, listener. A little bit of a clue into some of the stuff that I am getting up to. I have been off for the summer, listening into stuff, writing in a book, and after 20 years of Momo, working out what I want to do with all this stuff that's come to me over the years. And I do strangely trust them all very much to come back with some very wise understanding about how we make stories. And that's the point of Unsee the Future, and especially the Hopeychattybits, to talk practically about how we rewrite the stories we think we're in. You can follow me on all the usual channels, though I am getting very close to jumping ship from all the usual corporate channels onto maybe an Intertwingularity instance. I don't know. I want to get more decentralized. But it has been an absolute joy to chat with everybody today and just give you a glimpse of what might be coming with the shape of things to hum. I can say I'm going to be launching a campaign called Are You Looking for a Change of State? I'm working up some one-man show versions of this. And then we are planning to try and get into a couple of festivals, a new iteration of 5 songs called 6 Songs to help us unsee the future. More on that soon. And we shall be coming back with a new series of the Hopeychattybits, talking to more storytellers, artists and solar punks, reimagining the stories we think we're in sometime in the new year. In the meantime, I shall look amateurishly for the right asset to punch out, because I actually hit the wrong asset. That should have been the other one. And ciao for now. See you soon.
That was fun.
Hey, we're in the green room.
This is like a little bit afterwards that we think it stopped and it hasn't. So
Much P's and Q's.
We should do, yeah. Well, this is a point. You can, if you need to go, you can now go. But I have just noticed we have the most perfect person watching live, because we didn't promote this as a live thing. It's Hazel Evans.
Who I'm going to predict now is going to be the muse.
Yes, because she was in 5 songs.
She
I've actually
written all over it.
She just is the muse, right?
She is the muse.
Hazel. So Hazel says here, when you break it all down, if humanity dare, you will see that artists are actually among the most important humans. Artists are the creators, alchemists, birthing soul into life. Amen. AI will, she puts this with capitals, AI will never replace he or she who channels the universe to benefit humanity. Loving this, guys. Creating resistance in story, daring to tell radical truths. Yes!
Hey.
And we can do it with each other because we don't feel
Our
alone. when we talk
first
to each other.
fan, Hazel Evans, great.
Who is completely in there. So I would say, viewer, listener, if you're still listening, do go and check out 5 Songs for Breakfast, where Andy and Hazel and I, very next morning, try and work out what we did the night before. I'll leave that line there. Boys, thank you again for joining me. That was really, really good of you. I'm now just going to hit the end of the broadcast so we can go and do our Sundays.
Have a good day.
Farewell. Beautiful brother.
Wiedersehen.